Great. Good evening, everyone. It is about 6:05, so I'm going to go ahead and get things started, and maybe we'll get some stragglers coming in the next few minutes. Welcome to Tool Maintenance and Repair, the next installment in the Trail Conferences series entitled Topics That Would Have Been Easier to Teach in Person. But that said, we're still going to push forward, and hopefully should help you all learn a little bit more about taking care of your trail tools, and so you can stay safe and keep your tools nice and happy. Again, my name is Ben Sugar. I'm the Senior Trail Builder here at the Trail Conference. We'll get more into me in a few minutes. In the meantime, let's get rolling. So in terms of participation, there's only a few of us here so far. So if you have any burning questions, hopefully wait for a lull in my monotone, and feel free to unmute yourself and ask. You can also feel free to raise your hand there in the raise hand function under the participants tab here in Zoom. You can also enter any questions into the chat, and I will check periodically to see if anyone has any comments or questions, and I will get to those at the right time. In terms of tracking how many people are here attending this tonight, if you could please type your name in the chat box at this time. That's how we track attendance and see who's attended what and how successful these workshops are performing. So if you could do that now, that'd be great. Thank you. So speaking of thank yous, I wanted to thank, as usual, Liberty Subaru for graciously donating funding for these webinars, and they help make it happen. And they have special deals for Trail Conference members, so feel free to check that out. But again, big thank you to them. Also, this is, as usual, being recorded and uploaded to the cloud and will be available on our online learning library website at the Trail Conference's main web address, nynjtc.org. Following this, I will, in a follow-up email, be directing our service engagement folks to send a follow-up email, both to say thank you for attending, but also to offer some supplementary information if you want to know more. And you can always reach out to me with questions following the webinar. My email address is bsugar, S-U-G-A-R, at nynjtc.org. So what are we doing today? So we're going to be talking about taking care of tools, especially since it's November and a lot of people have, if you've had a busy season out there on the trail, or if you're just getting into it, you may have trail tools that need to get some TLC. And so we're going to be covering basic cleaning and rust removal to kind of undo what the hands of time have wrought in terms of rust and dirt. And then we're going to get into restoring an edge to some of those tools that we use for cutting and clipping, different ways of sharpening, proper technique, and then get into how do we take care of our wood handles, since so many of our tools have wood handles and it appears to be a bit of a lost art. And then for fiberglass tools, we're going to be covering how to rehandle certain tools that have fiberglass handles, such as hammers, mauls, those sorts of things. I'm not going to get into rehandling anything complicated like shovels or axes today. But if you have specific questions on that process, please feel free to reach out, and I can either answer them directly or point you to the appropriate resources. However, given how rocky everything is in this area, we don't tend to use a lot of axes in my experience in this area. So let me just check and make sure there's no questions yet. Okay, excellent. So let's be done with that. And so again, welcome to my basement. I apologize if the lighting is not ideal, but you know, like most people, I have a dungeon for a basement. So hopefully it will show up okay. I am not used to doing these videos here in this part of my house, so I have my fingers crossed. But in terms of tool maintenance, it's worth just launching in and talking about why do we need to do it? What are the benefits of taking the time to keep up your tools? I'm sure many times in our lives, most of us have had some tools that have been ridden hard and put away wet, so to speak, stayed a little rusty, maybe got left outside. But it is still worth at least periodically checking in and trying to glow up those tools and give them some love for a number of reasons. Certain tools especially are expensive. And if handles break or the tools themselves break, that can cost money. Also, there is, in some cases, a safety factor. Tools that are not maintained are oftentimes more dangerous, especially dull tools that are meant to keep an edge. Having those stay dull and try to continue using them becomes a safety hazard. And then finally, especially within trail work, a lot of times tools are shared. So it's nice to be able to receive a tool that's been used by someone else and have it be in tip-top shape, clean, rust-free, and sharp. So when we talk about maintaining tools in terms of safety, there's a few basic items of PPE that we need. And now in COVID times, hopefully I don't need to explain what PPE is, but generally that means gloves, eye protection, and then for certain power tool use, you'll want to have earplugs for your ears. And then for any sanding that you might do, you're going to want to have a dust mask at the very least, if not an N95. And I just realized I grabbed 2 left-handed gloves, so give me just a moment. Be right back. Okay, sorry about that. So ideally, especially for the sharpening portion of this, you will want to have leather gloves. I personally don't care for leather gloves because they make my hands less dexterous. I prefer these nitrile covered gloves, which are pretty ubiquitous these days because I feel like if I can feel what I'm handling, I can do a better job, and also I can avoid injury more effectively. So in terms of cleaning, end of the season, coming off of a trail or maybe a large project, some of your tools may be very dirty. The most basic tool for cleaning at the root is going to be your wire brush, usually available in the paint department of the hardware store. Although if you happen to have a barbecue scraper or a barbecue brush, that would work okay as long as it's not covered in pieces of hamburger. But generally, this is the workhorse of the cleaning and even also the rust removal part of tool maintenance. So this is the standard size. Sometimes one of these little guys is also useful for getting into tight spaces. And the same thing as apply. These things are probably $2. These are maybe $4. They're not very expensive, and they will last you a long time. Typically, in terms of cleaning, that's going to be all you absolutely need in order to clear off the dirt and mud and debris that would be on your tools. If you want to give a deep cleaning and you are back at your house instead of out in the field, if you have some sort of like cleanser and a rag, something like Simple Green or an all-purpose cleaner, that would be perfectly fine to use to make your tools extra spick and span. Now, the biggest thing that we talk about when we're giving maintenance to tools is rust and scale removal. After we've had these tools outside, they've been used, maybe they've gotten wet, they've been out working for many days at a time, or it's been a long season. So we need to remove the rust and polish. And I'll show just as a demonstration. So this is, hopefully we can see this properly, an old Pulaski that I've restored and basically salvaged. And what you see here on the cheeks near the edge here, that's pitting from rust. Surface rust is normally not that big of a deal. It happens just exposure to air, especially exposure to water or, God forbid, salt. You will get surface rust, but if rust persists for long enough, it will start to eat into the body of the metal pretty extensively, and it can start to compromise the integrity of the tool. So to extend the life of your tool, what you want to do is remove that rust and then form a protective barrier with some sort of oil, and we'll get into that in a bit. So if we can see here, this is a beat up Axmatic of mine. Let's see if I can get it in the light properly. Very rusty, was left outside following my fence build this summer. So it's very rusty on the back side. I'm going to adjust this to see if I can make this easier to see. And really, in terms of rust removal, it's not rocket science. It's just elbow grease. Eventually, you will get at least the lion's share of this rust off. If all you have is a wire brush, that's fine. But another way you can remove rust is some good coarse grit sandpaper. Anywhere from 60 to 80 or to 100 grit actually will remove rust very well. But of course, sandpaper is disposable and can get expensive after a while. So I tend to only use it for a bit of a finishing. But it will help get that smooth removal of rust in the little nooks and crannies that the wire brush can't get to. And I'm just going to leave this tilted here for a second. So if I can show you this, so this is I've got a couple pairs of hand pruners, and this one wound up left outside for a day or two and got rusty, and I just kind of hung onto it this way. You can really see on the back side here, hopefully, how rusty this is right in there. Now, I actually already took some tools to this side, the actual blade, to clean this up, and you should see it's nice and shiny again. And the way I do that with a small tool like this is, again, I'll use the teeny tiny brush this time. Come in, give it a good scrubbing. Switch to the sandpaper. I could go on and on with this in order to really get it to a nice polished shine. And if I wanted to do that, the next step is generally some grade of steel wool to really buff off the last of that rust. And this is one of those cases where you would maybe go that far, because hand pruners are meant to be very sharp. They're meant to be precision tools for gardening and pruning, in addition to trail work. So you generally want to keep these in top shape. So I could continue on, but I think you all get the general idea. Now, just to come back to this, to our friend here, how rusty this is on the backside. Let's say I really wanted to give this a deep stripping of this rust, or maybe it was even worse than this. There are power tool options you can use for this, and I'm going to show you really quickly what we use for a trail cruise when things get really bad. So we use an angle grinder, and what this attachment is, this is a wire wheel cup. It's available at any hardware store, and this is called an arbor twist. So this is very thick gauge wire twisted in individual braids, arranged in a cup orientation. You can also get it laid flat if that's what you prefer, but this is a much faster way to strip rust off when things are serious and you really need to do a deep rehab on a tool. So I'm just gonna gear up here really quickly, and then I'll show you using this and show you what kind of difference it makes. By the way, I realized I was like, okay, oftentimes this is much easier if you have a bench vise in your workshop, or in the field if you have a buddy to hold on to your tool while you do something like this, masked up, obviously. But in this case, I thought it would be a little bit better and more approachable if I simply show what you would do if you don't have a bench vise in your home and you have something that's serving as a workbench. The next best thing is to have one of these fast adjustable bench clamps. This is by Irwin. Puts out about 300 pounds of force to clamp down. And for something like this, it works just great. So this is a very easy way to hold on to tools and other pieces of equipment while you work on them. I'll show you right here. So play around with different ways of using these so you find something that works and is stable for you. All right, that's good. All right, so hopefully the light's not too terrible and people can see. The key is to just have light pressure with this angle grinder, and make sure you have your eye protection on above all else. Ear protection is also really a good idea. I can recommend long sleeves for this, but to be honest, if one of these wires comes out and flies at you, it will go through a light shirt like this. So mostly just protect your eyes and your face is the best thing I can recommend. All right, going to get loud here for a second. So my clamp started to fail, so let's try that again. Okay. All right, so pretty quick, like I said, and I'm not sure if you can actually see. For the most part, it's shiny. Again, there is still some residual paint on this from the factory, but the rust is pretty much all gone. And all it takes, once you're done, is just a quick wipe to get off any rust residue, and you're in business. So if you're doing many tools at once, rather than spending a lot of elbow grease on using a wire brush, this can be a much more effective tool for removing a fair amount of rust at once. Let's see, what is next? Okay, so we're going to move on to talking about sharpening. Does anyone have any questions so far? All right, you're all enthralled with my teaching acumen. In terms of edge sharpening, it's important to note first and foremost. Oh, we got a chat item. Let's see if I can do this with my gloves on. Okay, not at this time. Awesome. First and foremost, to look at what's called the bevel of the tool. So hopefully you can see that there's a double bevel on this, the axe head of this axmatic. Both sides. It's meant for chopping wood. And then back here, let me see if I can orient it without, apparently not. There is technically two bevels on this mattock end, but really we focus mostly on one. You can treat it as a single bevel. And that means there's only one versus two tapers on the blade edge. A good example of a single bevel would be the pruners. So the pruners are only tapered and only beveled on this top side. The back side, it's completely smooth. So you really only want to sharpen on this bevel. Another good example is most Western chef knives have double bevel. They're sharpened on both sides, whereas many traditional Japanese chef knives, especially for cutting fish, are a single bevel. So the point is, don't go sharpening something that's not meant to be sharpened because there's only one side that's intended to have a bevel. In terms of, there's a number of bevels, and then there's also the aggressiveness of a bevel. The thinner, more tapered, and sharper the bevel of an edge is, the more aggressive it is, and the more it can cut in, say for a chisel or an axe, but it is more delicate. For chopping into dirt or chopping into roots in dirt, if you're going to be doing groundwork, you want a bevel that is less aggressive but more durable. So, for instance, on this Pulaski of mine, the edge that I put on this, the bevel is at an angle that is a bit more aggressive and a bit more tapered than the edge on the back or adze or mattock end. And whatever bevel is there, whatever angle, you typically want to continue following that instead of trying to create a new bevel or a new sharpening angle. All right. So, can't talk about sharpening without talking about files. So there's lots of different kinds of files, and they have different designations and descriptions, and it can be confusing. So you will sometimes hear about a mill file or a flat file versus a curved file or a round file. In general, all you really need to know is that a mill file and a flat file are essentially the same thing. So the one in this hand, this is a mill file and this is a flat file. The only difference is the taper. This one, they both actually taper on this axis, but this one is more or less square on this side. Let's see if it helps. The next thing is the cut. So if you can see, there is a bit of a checkerboard pattern on this type of file. So this is called a double cut file. It makes it more aggressive. It's going to remove more metal because it has teeth going in both directions. Contrast that with this. Hopefully you can see it. It's only got diagonal lines running in one direction. So this is a single cut file. It's a little harder to show because what you just saw there was a coarse or a bastard file with a double cut, which is more aggressive generally. And then this is a, I believe you would call this a first cut, which is a little bit lighter gauge. It's going to remove less metal, but it's going to give a finer finish. And down here, this little guy here, this one's only about 5 inches long. You would call that a second cut file because the teeth are that much smaller. So you would use this for finer finishing work, oftentimes on something that's more of a precision cutting implement, like a pair of hand pruners, for instance. What this actually comes from, this is the what we call the raker file that comes with a chainsaw maintenance kit, but you can adapt this for use on tools as well. Another thing worth mentioning about files is the length. So whether your file is 5 inches or 16 inches is going to affect how much you take off with each stroke. So if I stroke all 16 inches on each pass, that's going to, on the whole, remove more material than if I am only using this small 5-inch file, smaller passes. So not rocket science. Just remember when someone says, oh, order, you know, I've got a mill bastard file, what they mean is they've got a file like this that is a relatively coarse toothed file that tapers at the end. And then the only question is will it be a single cut or a double cut file? Okay. Any questions on that so far? That part can be a little bit bewildering for people. And I swear, I think it was maybe last year that I finally looked up all the information and got it straight. So let's go back to our friend, the Axmatic. And the edge on it is actually not terrible, but I will demonstrate putting an edge on the side of this face of the cutting edge. I haven't cleaned this end yet, but it doesn't matter. It's for demonstration purposes. So get off my back. All right. So I'm going to put this on. Put it down. Get a second one just to be extra sure. So, actually, I'll do it this way, given the angle. So, when you're using a file, for these smaller files, I like to make sure that the handle is attached. The handle is kind of optional. I like to have it for the smaller files in order to have a better grip. But on these really large ones, I find I have more control without the handle. So for this, I'm going to use it without. The standard way to file is to hold the tip in your non-dominant hand, 2 fingers underneath, thumb on top. Some other folks may have a slightly different grip on it, maybe a European technique, I don't know. But then have your dominant hand back here on what's called the tang, and the heel of the file, and you want to go at a cross angle and try to match in terms of up and down. You want to match that existing angle of your bevel. So you only press down enough to the point where you can tell material is being removed. Try the other side. That's a bit better. And I can see, you guys might not be able to see, but I'm starting to see some shine on this edge from where I've started to remove the rust and other material on the very top and produce a bit of a shine. There's shiny, fresh metal underneath. And I keep at that. Now I have already somewhat sharpened the other side of this bevel. So my goal is to get this to match and have the two ends intersect and come to a fine edge. And once I've gotten close to that with this double cut bastard file, I can move on to a smaller one if I want. Now this is the period where usually in order to check sharpness, I will take my glove off and just start to kind of get a feel. How sharp is that? Can't shave with it. You know, it doesn't even feel dangerous. So I need to keep going. All right. All right, that's a bit better. I'm starting to get an edge that feels like I could actually cut something. In this case, what I'd be using this for is to cut roots. So I'm going to move on and switch to my single cut first cut file, which is a little bit less coarse and also only has one direction of teeth. So it's going to take off less material, but give me a finer finish. So, and basically once this intersects, once these two bevels intersect into a nice fine edge, what you're going to start to get is a thin bit of a burr that actually curls over to the other side. So that's really the way to know that you're done in terms of having these two bevels intersect. You'll start to feel it on the underside. And so that means all you have to do is at the very end, flip your tool over and give one or two passes to that back side to smooth it out the rest of the way. So any questions so far in filing? Let me check the chat here. Yes, so you're getting a little bit ahead of me. We are going to be using a grinder, and I will show that in a second. Before we get to that, I am going to talk about sharpening loppers and pruners, because that can be difficult. Let me see. All right. Okay. For some reason, it's not showing me as the speaker. All right. So with hand pruners, let me get my glove back on here. Again, typically you want to use, if you're going to attempt to file them, you want to use a smaller file. And again, wish I had a webcam. Normally, so with a smaller file like this, as long as you brace your thumb on the heel, it's not long enough to require you to use two hands, which can be useful for a smaller tool like this. So as long as I have it up and over, I can get between the two parts of the pruners and give it the filing job it needs. And again, since this is a single bevel tool, single bevel edge, you will get that burr that kind of edges over on the underside a little bit faster. So then at the end, once I've gotten this to the sharpness I want, simply flip it over and just tip it. Worth mentioning, I forgot to mention this earlier, is if you want, there's nothing that says you have to push towards the edge, especially if you're not comfortable yet. If you're kind of getting started, you can also do the opposite. You can sharpen away from the edge, and that can be safer for beginners. If you want to, are worried about getting yourself cut on this edge, it works perfectly fine. It's just mostly my preferred style to do it that way. There's really no benefit or downside either method. We'll check the chat here. Is there ever a point where you should replace a tool rather than to try and sharpen it? Yes, a number of different reasons why. If the tool has been sharpened so much that you've lost, say, the usable length. So say I kept using this mattock day in, day out, out on a job site, and I have sharpened it back to, say, this point. It no longer has the effective reach that I would want or expect from a working tool. So this is my personal, so it hasn't received that much use, but we have mattocks in our inventory that have been in use since 2006, 2008, and they are on their, I wouldn't say last legs, but they are very well loved, to put it mildly. And eventually you would want to replace those. Another reason why you might replace a tool is if the edge has been dinged so bad on something precision, like loppers or hand pruners, that it would be functionally impossible to try and hone out that that gash or nick in the edge. If it will no longer function properly, even with an attempt to maintain it, that would be the only point. Or if, like I said, if the pitting on this got to a certain point beyond where I caught it, I might consider not using this anymore. Finally, what I can show you, we're going to get into hammer heads in a little bit, but if you can see on this hammer, it's been used so much that it's getting mushrooming on the edges. That is, the metal is spreading out from repeated use, just bashing on rocks all day long, day in, day out for years. Now we can fix this. We can start to, maybe grind this down a little bit and give it a new lease on life. But eventually, if that continues to happen, that's the one thing that will cause you to have to junk a hammerhead. Usually we talk more about handles needing to be replaced or thrown away rather than the heads themselves. Normally the heads are durable, they're a long-term investment. All right, so one other thing worth mentioning, if you really want a wicked sharp edge on, say, an axe or a pair of pruners or something like that, you're going to want to go beyond just files, and you'll want to use a honing stone. Now this is just a rectangular honing stone. I also have a circular honing stone that I will use to really fine tune that edge up to a razor sharpness. And typically for most trail tools that I use, I don't need anything to be that sharp. The only tool that in my personal kit that I keep that sharp is a double bit axe for chopping wood, just down trees or felling, which I almost never have to use. It's the only reason I actually sharpen anything that much. Although some people, some gardeners or maintainers may want to keep their pruners that sharp. And I'm fairly certain that you can actually disassemble these using this nut and take the cutting edge half off and really get at that edge more effectively. I've never had to do it. I've never been compelled, but it is something worth looking into if that is something you're inclined to do. All right, so back to sharpening and the question about using power tools, angle grinder. So for simplicity's sake, I have two grinders here. I don't have to change the heads. So this is another grinder, same model, but with a grinding wheel on it that's meant for grinding metal. There are different discs that, there's a diamond cup that is meant for grinding stone. This is for metal specifically. Although it can be used for some other materials, but that's all we ever use it for. Unlike the wire wheel, grinding metal puts out sparks. You will send out very small, very hot, like microparticles of hot metal that are being shaved off as you grind. So it's very important to have your guard on and make sure that it's pointed away from you. And again, eye protection, gloves, and probably keep your mouth closed too. You don't want hot iron filings in your mouth. A note about grinders though, in olden times before power tools were common, grinding wheels used to sharpen tools were powered usually by either water power or by foot power. And they did not spin at 15,000 RPMs. So it's worth remembering that we're dealing with a slightly different animal. And the downside to that is it tends to heat up metal that you're grinding much faster. And the challenge behind that is when you heat up a metal edge, you change what's called the temper on it. And you can make the surface of the metal very hard, but also very brittle, and make it more prone to chipping and having small pieces break off. So that means two things. We want to always be moving with our grinder when we're sharpening metal, in order to keep from heating up any single spot so much that it completely detempers the steel and essentially makes it very prone to chipping. The other thing that we want to try to do is to be very deliberate about which kinds of tools or which kinds of edges we're going to subject to the heat of an angle grinder. So any sort of precision cutting instrument like an axe or loppers or anything like that, that needs to be very, very sharp and to a specific tolerance, we're going to do that with the file. But for something like a matic edge, something that is, we want it sharp, but if it's got a chip in it, it's not the end of the world. We can absolutely use the grinder. So let me get this set up and I will show you what this looks like. So quick note on the angle grinders. I highly recommend, if you get one, to get one with the paddle switch on it rather than a thumb switch on the side. This makes it much easier to control when you turn it on and off, which is a great benefit in terms of safety and control. So Let me go ahead and put my ear protection in. All right, let's do it to it. Other than pointing that out, the other reason I stopped is in order to give the metal a moment to cool down. I do a maximum of 4 or 5 passes and then give a few seconds for the metal, for the heat to dissipate, because I really want to avoid having any sort of buildup where I risk detempering it. And just to note, if you see a black spot or some iridescence on the metal edge, you've left the grinding wheel in one particular spot for too long, and it's detempered that spot. Not the end of the world, but also not what you want to shoot for. All right, let's do a little bit more. Part of that detempering effect that a grinder will produce on a metal edge is not just that it makes it more liable to chip, but it also makes it hard to the point that it makes it very difficult for files to ever penetrate and be able to sharpen them effectively anymore. So it's one of those things where once you take a grinder to that piece of metal, you may be able to get it back into filing shape, but it's harder. So really be deliberate from the start whether you want to grind that tool or you want to file it instead, and try to stay consistent with that. So that was actually extremely quick. That was 10 passes, and trying to keep to the same angle on each pass rather than having it change back and forth, and then I'm kind of working against myself. But this way, whoop, hopefully I can show it. That is nice and crazy sharp. About as good as you could expect to get a Matic, beyond which is kind of like wasted effort. So 10 passes and you're done. All right, so that is sharpening as far as I can figure. Does anyone have any specific questions about that or anything else we've gone over so far? All right, great. So the next thing to talk about is preventing rust from building up again. So you've got the rust off of your tool. You know, you've got it relatively polished up. You've got a nice sharp edge on it. How do you keep it in shape, especially if it's just going into storage? You want some sort of barrier to keep air and moisture away from the metal surface to prevent rust from forming. The old way of doing things was typically to use motor oil, and motor oil works fine. One problem with motor oil is it doesn't really dry ever. It stays a little bit tacky. The other downside I find with motor oil is it's motor oil. It's a synthetic chemical product that I don't really feel great about. Plunging tools covered in motor oil into the ground in the forest. And so what I've found is I have started using the same oil that I use for handles. And so we'll get into that now, and we'll just kind of cover it all at once. So talking about taking care of wooden handles it's a little bit of a lost practice in many quarters of the public. We use tools not necessarily as much as tradesmen or women, but as just kind of hobbyists or just work around the house. But if you're someone who really relies on a tool for day in, day out work, you want it to really take care of your handles. Instead, what we tend to get now, I'll show you this rake handle. For a rake I just purchased is this. So here's the handle to my rake. Shiny, shiny. And that what you see there is varnish that has been just coated over the surface of the wood to try and protect it from moisture and prevent it from drying out. The problem is that is a short-term solution. Eventually the varnish will crack, your wood will dry out, and then dry wood is less flexible and will snap and crack, and then you've got a handle that needs to be replaced. But they do this because they know that these days most people don't maintain their wooden handles. If you intend to actually maintain your wooden handles, the first thing you should do is strip this varnish off. So here you see I've sanded this more or less to the point where the varnish is gone on this end of this handle. And my sandpaper. Again, I prefer a 60 or an 80 grit to really get in there. And hopefully I can show you here kind of on the fringes. This is where I'm kind of half done. You can still see some shiny spots that need to be taken off. And if you don't get rid of those, it's going to prevent proper infiltration of the oil that we're going to put on it. So, I can get in and just give this another go really quickly to get that last little bit out. I also really want to focus on the end grain. Make sure that is exposed, because the end grain can be very important. If I were doing any more than this, I would want to put on a dust mask since I'm indoors. But the way we actually want to treat our wooden handles is with linseed oil. Now this is boiled linseed oil. It is treated with some additives to make it dry a little bit faster. If you can find raw linseed oil, it is more of a natural product, and that's great. But typically it's just a lot easier to find this. It dries faster, and it's just easier to work with. It's also cheaper, if memory serves. So what we want to do for that, if you have some of those kind of blue paper towel-y shop rags, those are fine. I use an old t-shirt. Pick this down just a bit, and we just liberally douse some of this linseed oil onto our rag. Don't be shy about it. And then watch what happens to the coloration on this once I put it on. Essentially, it soaks into the wood and becomes more or less the same finish as that varnish. It has a wood darkening effect. And I always want to make sure that I really make sure I get a good dose onto that end grain, because you think about how wood fibers work. They run in parallel, and the end grain is kind of the hollow end of the tube where any liquids can get soaked up. So you can get a fair amount of oil impregnated into the wood if you liberally treat the end grain. So it's not shiny like this anymore, but it's just got like a very dull sheen. And that will keep the wood, that'll keep the wood fibers nice and lubricated and keep the wood pliant and supple so that it doesn't crack under bending and stress. Now, since this is a brand new piece and this is the first time I've oiled it, it's going to soak this up like it's nothing. I probably will want to come back to this after 2 or 3 days, if I think of it, and give it a second treatment to really let it soak in. And if you do this to your tools at least like once a year, once every 2 years, they will last a lot longer. The handles will last and not crack. And for something like an axe handle or something that's kind of a pain to replace, if you don't want to have to rehandle a shovel and you don't feel like buying a new shovel, I highly recommend you take care of that handle because rehandling a shovel is no fun. So essentially, my Pulaski here is due for a little love. This has been stripped and oiled in the past, but I'm overdue. I think it's been about 18 months since I've oiled it. So I'm just going to go ahead and give this a fresh oiling, get the end grain. And while I'm here, rather than getting a whole different rag and soaking it with motor oil, I just go ahead and oil down the head too. There's really no reason. It does perfectly fine. It does the same job. But at the end of the day, it actually dries. It dries to a polymer, kind of a hard plastic-like substance on the outside. And that way it's not tacky to your hands every time you touch it. But this should protect it for rust for the next year or more, or until the next time I give it some heavy use. All right. Okay. Any questions on dealing with wooden handles? Got linseed all over my hands. Just like with most oils and spirits, they are flammable. And if you leave them in the hot sun or in an open dumpster in the hot sun, they have a very low ignition point. And you want to be very careful. During summertime, oftentimes what I'll do with any rags I use to rub linseed oil, I'll put them in an empty coffee can out in a driveway or something and actually burn them up so that there's no chance that they're going to cause a fire anywhere else. All right. Take off the oily gloves. So let's talk briefly, and this will be the last item for today, about rehandling fiberglass tools with epoxy. So our crews working for the Conservation Corps do a lot of rock breaking, and so they use a lot of hammers, and they also break a lot of hammers. So this is a hammerhead that is freshly-ish broken. The handles just happen to pop out from the epoxy. And the way we handle these is, no pun intended, we want to get out this old epoxy so we can actually deal with this and prep it for new epoxy. So first thing I'm going to do is riddle this thing full of holes. Come in with a power drill. I don't want to use a long bit because I don't want to go drilling into my table, but just you can see the epoxy shade coming out of there. And so I would do this, you know, until I've absolutely turned this into Swiss cheese. And then whether you have a hole punch, I have a big machinist screwdriver that I tend to use as a rough chisel. I will come in with this and a hammer and try to bust out the pieces of this in order to clean it out. And this is, you know, this is all true for Smaller hammers like this for sledgehammers or wood splitting mauls, anything that is affixed using epoxy, this is the same. So just like on a cooking show, I've got different hammerheads. They're at different stages of preparation. This one has been mostly pounded out of the old epoxy. There's a little bit left over here on the inside edges. And the way I deal with that is with, if you have one, you can either use sandpaper, that is a little bit longer, more intensive process, or I like to have a small like multi-tool Dremel with a small grinding stone on it. Now I'll turn that on to low. Actually, I'll turn it on to high. When you see sparks, you know that it's working. So I've got a little mound of epoxy dust there. Move that off. And then once you've blown that clean, and you know that it's clean on the inside, you know, it should be just down to bare metal. Now we're ready to put on a new handle to this. First step is to determine what is the bottom. So at least on hammers, there's usually some stamping that tells you information about how heavy it is and who the manufacturer is. That's almost always the bottom of the hammer. Doesn't really matter, but I'm a stickler for details. So, and then on the top, we just put some good waterproof like duct tape or something like that to hold in our epoxy, and then put that tape side down. Here is our handle. A couple of the features you'll see, so there's this fiberglass core here, and then there is a metal clip that kind of helps the handle grab onto the epoxy inside the head. So you really do want this metal clip. The other feature that this one has is a little foam rubber O-ring, a little seal that will help keep the epoxy in, and it forms a nice tight seal. Other models of handle will come with a kind of like a putty or a gray gum sort of material that you put on manually. I don't like that stuff. It's kind of gross. It tends to, it never really cures or dries. So I try to avoid it and get this nice little O-ring if I can. So the handle that you buy should come with an epoxy kit. And it comes with a fun little sippy cup and a popsicle stirrer and two components. So there's a resin and a hardener, which helps it cure. And they're in two separate tubes. You can also buy epoxy, you know, on its own at the hardware store if you want, but typically these handles come with this as a kit. So I'm just going to grab my scissors and empty 1/2 into the cup. Being careful to make sure I get some on my hands because I always do. And I flip it over up the other side. Squeeze out the fun bit. Try to get it all out if you can so that the mix proportion is, you know, approximately what it's meant to be to cure properly. So one component is clear, the other is kind of an amber color. Once you mix it up, it starts to turn a kind of a cloudy, gooey color because of it's actually an exothermic reaction, and it produces heat as it starts to cure. Now that I've done this, the clock is ticking. I have got maybe 4 or 5 minutes to get this in and get the handle in. So I'm going to carefully put in enough to fill this up about halfway, because remember, we still have to fit the hammer or the handle in. And I don't want to go too crazy and fill it up to the point where it's gooing out all over the sides. So I think I did just about the right amount. So you get it in until that O-ring seal is where you want it. Make sure it's kind of even around the sides. I come down and I check, is it more or less plumb up and down? Seems to be. If you're in a spot where there's any concern that it could get knocked over, what you're going to want to do is, let me just put this up. I'm actually going to move it back here, up against the wall. And I'm very gently going to take a little bit more tape here and just lightly secure it, so I know it's not going to go anywhere. Typically this epoxy, as long as it's at about 73 degrees-ish, it will cure within a few hours and be completely set in 24. I try to give them about 48 hours to be absolutely you know, I don't want to jump the gun. But if you are in colder conditions, it can take a longer period of time. Once it gets down below about 55, 60 degrees, if I'm going to be hanging hammer heads on new handles, I want to give that epoxy at least a week to cure, because it's much slower under colder conditions. Like I said, I don't have an axe head to rehandle at the time. If any of you are particularly interested in that, or any other more specific topics, feel free to get in touch with me and let me know. Otherwise, that is all she wrote for this webinar. Does anyone have any questions? Finishing up? You're very welcome. I hope it was useful. All right, I will be sending on some additional information, especially on files and such. So look for an email from me. Otherwise, I hope you all have a safe and happy holiday. Take care, everyone.